When the little pink-haired elf girl shows the final boss who the real final boss is. In 1995, Telenet Japan's Wolf Team Studio created the first game in what would become a beloved anime action RPG series. The game's total programmer, Yoshiharu Gotanda, wrote the story to the game. Its world was based on Norse mythology with science fiction elements added in. Names were taken from the works of H.P. Lovecraft and Michael Moorcock to accommodate Japanese fans of Western fantasy fiction. Gotanda had to make many changes to his original story for the game. The game was given the genre characteristic, legendary RPG embellished with voices, a moniker reflecting its ambition to bring quality voice work to a Super Famicom JRPG. That's right, I said Super Famicom, not PlayStation, but the Japanese equivalent to the Super Nintendo. The game was published by Namco. It was built on a special high-capacity 48 megabit game cartridge. To fit the full voice recording for dialogue and the theme song, a special flexible voice drive sound system was used. The voice work was a huge deal in a Super Famicom JRPG in 1995, as even heavyweights like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy weren't voice recording for any of their JRPGs at the time, and neither of those series had serious voice work until the PlayStation 2 era. Kosuke Fujishima, the creator of manga series Oh My Goddess and You're Under Arrest, redid the character and art designs for the game. Unlike most JRPGs in the 90s, this one took gameplay inspiration from fighting games at the time. It used what the team dubbed as a linear motion battle system to establish the game's identity. This battle system played out on a 2D field stretching wider than a single screen that would scroll according to the player and enemy's position. Special moves or combos could be set to buttons so players could easily execute them in battle. The player controlled the main character in real time, while allies could be set to predetermined AI patterns like passive mode or active mode. A pause menu could be used to allow players to select spells for their allies to use or items. A second player with a controller could control another character on the field. Motoi Sakuraba, Shinji Tamura, and Ryota Furuya composed the game's soundtrack. The game also received several remakes over the years with fuller voice acting, new title songs, richer anime openings by anime production studio Production IG, a new playable character, and elements from newer Tales games in the series. This monster of a game released at the end of the Super Famicom's life cycle that squeezed out all of the console's power was called Tales of Fantasia. The game's original battle system, cutting-edge Super Famicom graphics, and the inclusion of voice acting and voice work in a JRPG made it highly anticipated at the time in Japan. But because it was competing with Dragon Quest VI, it only sold 212,000 copies on its release, which is respectable considering what it was up against. However, the PlayStation remake released in 1998 sold an additional 769,000 copies, and the PSP 2006 full voice version sold an additional 136,000 copies. And like a lot of the awesome Super Famicom JRPGs I talk about on this channel, of course this game that sold over 1 million copies in Japan did not release in the West during its heyday in the golden age of JRPGs. Instead, the only two versions of this game that can be played legally in English without fan translations are the Game Boy Advance version that quietly released in the West in 2006 and the iOS version released in 2014. Along with the game's PlayStation release was a huge marketing push. Famitsu Bunko published several series of 7 related novels written by Sara Yajima in 1999 and 2000. The 2-volume Harukanaru Jiku, which translates to Faraway Space Time, Shinku no Hitomi, which translates to Crimson Eyes, Konpeki no Kizuna, or The Azure Bonds, Kohaku no Kaido, which translates to Amber Corridor, and Ruri no Yume, or Dreams of Lapis Lazuli. In addition to the books, Kadokawa Shoten's Tales of magazine featured a manga adaptation of the game simply titled Tales of Fantasia in 2008, more than a decade after the game's original release in 1995. Each version of the game also released with guidebooks and several illustration books. An OVA adaptation of 4 30-minute episodes called Tales of Fantasia, the animation, was also created from 2004 to 2006 and distributed by Genion in America in 2007. And in 2006, Namco also released a series of 6 drama CDs featuring characters from the game. A book called Tales of Fantasia, the animation art graphy, was also released featuring conversations between the voice actors of characters Kless and Mint, as well as an interview with character designer Kosuke Fujishima. As if all that wasn't enough, a dungeon-crawling sequel to Tales of Fantasia called Tales of Fantasia Narikiri Dungeon was released on the Game Boy Color in November 2000 in Japan, and a remake of this sequel, titled Tales of Fantasia Narikiri Dungeon X, was released on August 5th, 2010 for the PSP in Japan. I got to play the Super Famicom version of Tales of Fantasia years later with a fan translation patch, and I had a blast with it. I'm glad the game can at least be played in the West now, but it's still kind of sad we didn't get the game officially on the Super Super Nintendo. Needless to say, Namco was deadly serious about making the Tales series their flagship JRPG series. Of course, this story was only the beginning of the Tales series. 3 Wolf Studio vets, including Tales series creators Yoshiharu Gotanda, Masaki Norimoto, and Joe Asanuma, left Wolf Team over disagreements during the development of Tales of Phantasia. They formed Tri-Ace, which is most famous for the Star Ocean series of games that directly competes with Tales of and Valkyrie Profile. In the meantime, Namco and Wolf Team were hard at work on their next game in the Tales series, Tales of Destiny, which released on the PlayStation in 1997. The genre characteristic theme for this game was simply RPG of Destiny. This game enhanced Tales of Phantasia's linear motion battle system. Melee and ranged attacks were executed in real time, and spells had a casting time but would freeze the action as they were actually executed, interrupting the actions on screen. Special attacks hitting multiple times or dealing extra damage used a currency called TP, and the battle system rewarded players with extra experience points for stringing together longer combos. Like Tales of Phantasia, players could assign AI to their party members or turn off and on spells they wanted the AI to use during battle. Tales of Destiny featured art by manga artist Mutsumi Inomata, and animated cutscenes created by Production IG. The game was released in North America in 1998, and while the localization producer wanted the game to be fully voiced in English, the game ended up keeping its Japanese voice acting in the end. Tales of Destiny ended up being the highest-selling Tales game in Japan for its time, and ended up selling over 1 million copies worldwide. This was also the first Tales game I played. I remember playing it with my friend in 1998, and then beating the game after borrowing it from him. It was fun to actually play an RPG with my friend. It had been a couple years since Secret of Mana allowed me to do the same thing. It was a very good game, and I loved how unique the combat felt compared to Final Fantasy and even other action RPGs I had played a few years prior, like Secret of Mana. It felt a bit like playing a beat-em-up style RPG at the time, although with a lot less technical depth in the fighting gameplay and a greater emphasis on RPG elements like leveling up and making smart decisions on spellcasting and item using in battle. I enjoyed the game enough to be interested in future games in the Tales of series, and go out of my way to play DJAP's fan translation of Tales of Phantasia when it was finally released. But the game definitely didn't hit me as hard to be as memorable for me as games like Secret of Mana or Trials of Mana did in the same time period, or even Tri-Ace's newly competing Star Ocean series, which took the action RPG battles to a 3D field. I felt like the Tales series had a lot of future potential though. Anyways, Tales of Destiny got a 2006 PS2 remake that included some extra Tales features like an active party window for party members to chat during the adventure, an aerial element to the linear motion battle system, fully voiced key cutscenes, 3-dimensional environments, and redrawn character sprites. A year after that game, a director's cut was also released on the PlayStation 2 that could load the remake's save data and included a Leon mode to experience the game through another character's perspective, as well as making the original main character's sister a playable character. This director's cut was also released with a limited edition including an art book and soundtrack. Speaking of soundtrack, Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura returned to do work on the game's soundtrack. The Japanese game has a vocal OP sung by Dean called Yume de Aru Yoni, or Like a Dream in English. However, due to licensing issues, an original song was composed for the English version. The West never got an official release for the superior director's cut of Tales of Destiny 2, but if emulation doesn't offend you, Life Bottle Productions has a 100% patch for the game they made 3 years ago to play that version of the game in English. Wolf Team ended up releasing the next game, Tales of Eternia, in Japan in the year 2000 as the third main title in the series. This game's genre characteristic theme was RPG of Eternity and Bonds. The game inherited the battle system from Tales of Destiny. Unlike prior Tales games, the player could save the game anywhere. Confusingly, this game was localized in the West in 2001 on the PlayStation 1 as Tales of Destiny 2 despite having no ties to the first game. This was probably a decision made due to the fact that Tales of Destiny was the first Western released Tales game, so its connection to Tales of Destiny would attract players who enjoyed that game. Sort of like the reasoning behind Squaresoft naming Final Fantasy IV Final Fantasy II in the West when that game was first released on the Super Nintendo. Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura returned once again to make the soundtrack to this game. And once again, the Japanese title song, Flying, performed by Garnet Crow, had to be replaced for the Western release. The PlayStation 1 game sold over 873,000 copies worldwide and reviewed well. I remember having as much fun with the game as I did Tales of Destiny, although if I'm being honest, I didn't find the game too memorable within the grand scope of the Tales series. Tales of Eternia also got a PSP release in Japan, Europe, and Australia that sold an additional 398,000 copies worldwide and reviewed about as well as the original game on the PlayStation 1. Tales of Eternia also spawned a 13-episode anime produced and animated by Xebec called Tales of Eternia that ran on Japanese television from January 2001 to March 2001. The plot was unrelated to the game, but it kept its 4 main characters and some common elements from the game's world too. A Tales of Eternia massively multiplayer online RPG was also developed and ran from March 3rd, 2006 to March 31st, 2007 in Japan only. Of course, Tales of Destiny sold so well that Wolf Team and Telenet Japan developed a direct sequel actually called Tales of Destiny 2, which was only released in Japan on the PlayStation 2 in 2002 and later in 2007 on the PSP. Its genre characteristic theme was RPG to release Destiny. Destiny 2's story takes place 18 years after the first game's story. The new version of the battle system was called the Trust and Tactical Linear Motion Battle System. The characters had SP that determined the quality of their offensive and defensive performance, standard attacks, stronger attacks called arts now, and the Tales series iconic high-powered Hisatsuwaza or Mystic Arts attacks. After battle, players were given a grade which could lead to characters learning new skills, and some bonuses earned through grade would carry over into the new playthroughs. A 4-player option was available, and even an option to make all characters controlled by AI for auto battle. Sakuraba and Tamura once again did the soundtrack to the game. Despite only releasing in Japan and parts of Southeast Asia, the PlayStation 1 game sold almost 1 million copies as of December 2007. A PSP version of the game was released in February 2007 that added another 115,000 units of sales to that number. Unfortunately, this is one of the few Tales games that hasn't been completely translated in English yet, but there is a fan translator working on the game, so hopefully in the future, if Bandai Namco doesn't get around to it first with a remaster or remake, we'll be able to play the game completely in English someday. In addition to the game, 3 print adaptations of the story were made. A 3-volume comic anthology, a serialized 5-volume comic that originally ran in Square Enix's Gangan Comics, an 8-volume Yonkoma comic, and a second single edition Yonkoma. A novel adaptation featuring the character Nanali called Tales of Destiny 2, The Amber Wind was also published. There were also other graphic novels that told segments of the story from other characters' perspectives. Utsumi Inomata's art was featured in an art book that released in March 2005. A 5-part drama CD called Tales of Destiny 2 Drama CD also released in parts from April to August 2003. On August 9, 2003, Namco Tales Studio, which was really Wolf Team's new name after Namco purchased a majority stake in them, released the next game in the Tales series, Tales of Symphonia, on the Nintendo GameCube. Tales of Symphonia's genre characteristic theme is RPG that resonates with you. Tales of Symphonia changed up the linear motion battle system from previous games with a new multi-line linear motion battle system. A unison attack gauge was added that would fill as opponents were damaged. When the gauge is full, a powerful unison attack could be triggered, concentrating the party's powerful attacks simultaneously on one enemy. Certain combinations of attack would trigger additional damage. Grade was awarded after battle in addition to gold and experience points, which could be used to unlock features for New Game Plus. Players could also cook food after battles to confer certain bonuses. Ranked EX gems could set abilities onto characters equipped with them, and special EX skills could be unlocked with certain combinations of EX gems. Characters also equipped titles earned through progression or completing certain things to determine their attribute growths upon level up. In addition to the rich battle system, the game featured an overworld 3D map with several modes of transportation. Players could view skits between the characters on the overworld and field maps too that really developed their character and made minor differences in the game's storyline. These skits were fully voiced in the Japanese version of the game. The game made a big splash for being the first 3D game in the series and was released on 2 discs on the GameCube. Its Western localization was also tailored more towards Western audiences by hiring experienced Western voice actors. To give my 2 cents, Tales of Symphonia was easily the best JRPG on the GameCube, even better than Monolith Soft and Bandai Namco's other GameCube published JRPGs Baten Kaitos 1 and 2. And in fact, it was so well designed for the GameCube hardware that its future ports on much stronger hardware couldn't perform nearly as well as the original game did on the GameCube. Granted, the GameCube was starved for JRPGs at the time, which I think greatly contributed to the game's success on the platform. And the GameCube really needed a rockstar JRPG at the time, since Nintendo's platforms stopped getting great JRPGs after games like Final Fantasy VII just blew away the JRPG world using PlayStation's CD technology. And most other companies saw this and were following Square Enix's lead throughout the PlayStation and PlayStation 2's generation. Tales of Symphonia wouldn't even make my top 20 compared to everything I've played over the past almost 4 decades now. But it was a great game for its time, and even the first Tales game I actually remember more details about, even if it isn't my favorite game in the series. Tales of Symphonia was released in 2004 in the West on GameCube, in 2004 in Japan only on PlayStation 2, then in 2013 and 2014 on the PlayStation 3 and finally on the Switch, PS4, and Xbox One in 2023. Overall, the game's estimated sales are around 2.4 million copies, making it one of the best-selling Tales games. The game spawned 7 manga adaptations, 6 anthology collections, and a traditional manga series. There were also 2 novel adaptations, 4 strategy guides, a character book, an official scenario book, and an art book. Frontier Works produced 7 drama cities based on the game's plot, and DigiCube published Tales of Symphonia original soundtrack in 2003. On the anime front, there was a 4-episode OVA series called Tales of Symphonia the Animation, and its sequel, Tales of Symphonia the Tetheala episode, which also had 4 episodes. A second 3-episode sequel, titled Tales of Symphonia the United World episode, was also produced. The next game in the Tales series, Tales of Rebirth, was released exclusively in Japan in 2004 on the PlayStation 2. It was developed by Team Destiny, which was to specialize in creating 2D Tales games, and Mutsumi Inomata, who did the character designs in Tales of Destiny, returned to do the designs in Tales of Rebirth. Tales of Rebirth's genre characteristic theme was RPG where you will be reborn. Instead of a navigable overworld, players would select locations on a standard map to fast travel to them. Skits were still in the game, and characters could master cooking a recipe to earn experience points when cooking it. The game used a similar multi-plane battle system to Tales of Symphonia. A rush gauge could be triggered to increase attack power at the expense of defense. Mystic arts could be performed with other party members to inflict high damage to enemies, and grade was awarded according to battle performance. Instead of gold, characters could improve their equipment with enhancement points earned after battle that could also be transferred between weapons. A PSP version of the game released in 2008 also added an optional battle arena for single or multiplayer matches. Tales of Rebirth sold 605,000 units on the PlayStation 2 by December 2007, and the PSP version sold 83,000 units by the end of 2008. The game inspired a 5-volume book series released from February 2005 to November 2005. Guidebook and art books were released for the game. Comics collected into 2 anthologies released in 2005. The story also adapted into a 4-part audio drama series called Tales of Rebirth Drama CD. A new DVD drama was released with the PSP game called Dramatic DVD Peach Pie Edition for pre-orders and contained voice actor interviews as well as stage videos from Jump Festa 2008. Sadly, Tales of Rebirth has never received an official Western localization. However, extremely recently, Life Bottle Production has created a 100% playable fan translation for the game on December 18, 2024 that makes it playable in English if emulation doesn't offend you. Personally, I haven't had a chance to get to it yet, but I'm going to play this game soon. Maybe I'll make a video about it if it can actually impress me enough to need to talk about it. Anyways, Tales of Legendia was the next Tales game to release in Japan in 2005 and in North America in 2006. A team of developers from Namco's Tales studio, along with developers from Tekken and Soul Calibur, created the game. Go Shiina composed the soundtrack to the game instead of series mainstays Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura. Kazuto Nakazawa, who did a lot of character design for animes like Samurai Champloo, El Hazard, and Final Fantasy Unlimited, did the character design for this game. Tales of Legendia's genre characteristic theme was RPG where bonds spin legends. Tales of Legendia features random encounters unlike prior games in the series. After completing the main story, there's another series of scenarios focusing on the individual characters, and certain story segments are accompanied by animated sequences. This game's variation on the linear motion battle system was called the crossover linear motion battle system, which let players move around and engage enemies in real time to be as similar to a traditional fighting game as possible. Battles were still limited to a 2D plane. Players could fill a climax gauge that, when expended, would freeze the enemies in place for a short period of time. All I'm going to say is that Tales of Legendia is, in a JRPG series with pretty consistent good quality, one of the 2 Tales games I wouldn't recommend to anybody. The game felt too much like a step backwards for the series for me after playing Tales of Symphonia. There was nothing remarkable about this game, and I can't even remember much about the game despite having played and beaten it, other than that it was one of the most middling JRPGs I had played, even if it wasn't a terribly designed or flawed game like Quest 64 or 7 Saga or some other games I think were even worse. Go Shiina's soundtrack to the game was pretty good though, I'll give it that. Anyways, Namco must not have had much confidence in the game either, because despite 400,000 worldwide unit sales, they didn't really push this game hard with books, manga, and anime like they did with a lot of their other Tales games. Moving on, a much better Tales game also released in Japan in 2005 and in North America in 2006 on the PlayStation 2, and that's Tales of the Abyss. The genre characteristic theme for this game was To Know the Meaning of One's Birth RPG. This game's flex range linear motion battle system offered increased mobility compared to Tales of Symphonia, with a camera that would zoom in or out to show all the participants in a battle. Multiplayer co-op was featured in the battle system, and a free run feature let players run in all directions unlike previous Tales games. AD skills that could be learned could be equipped or unequipped in battle. Capacity cores took the place of titles from Tales of Symphonia, giving players stat bonuses on level up, and when stats reached certain thresholds, the AD skill would be acquired. Elemental fields, called Fields of Phonons, created when characters repeatedly use an element, could be stood on to power up other skills with the element, and enemies could dangerously utilize these fields too. An overlimit gauge also fills up over time, and players can use their mystic arts when it is full. On New Game Plus, characters unlock an additional mystic art they can use, and enemy bosses have their own mystic arts too. I don't remember the stories and characters to a lot of Tales games, despite the characters being a huge draw for the series as a whole, but I really like the story to Tales of Abyss. Without spoiling it, it really played on the concept of fate, destiny, and even personal identity in a way I'd never seen before in any other JRPG or video game for that matter. I also thought the battle system was a lot of fun. Utilizing the fields of phonons to power up ordinary skills is very satisfying. The game brought back would have become the Tales staples at this point too, with the skits, cooking features, grade, and titles that had various effects, including changing the appearance of characters through costumes. Accomplishing tasks would also allow players to earn new costumes. I really miss this, as nowadays Bandai Namco would rather have you pay for costumes as DLC than earn them through gameplay. Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura did the game's soundtrack, like most games in the series up to this point, and Bump of Chicken's title theme had to be replaced for the Western release due to licensing issues like usual. The PlayStation 2 version of the game sold 734,000 copies worldwide by December 2007, and the later 3DS version sold an additional 126,000 copies in Japan. A 26-episode Tales of Abyss anime was aired in Japan between October 4, 2008 and March 28, 2009. I actually watched it, and while it was nothing special amidst the multitude of anime I'd watched over the years up to that point, it was much better than most video game-based animes I've watched. 3 manga adaptations of Tales of Abyss were also made, covering characters like Ash and fan favorite Jade Curtis. On October 26, 2006, Tales of the Tempest was released only in Japan on the Nintendo DS. Its genre-characteristic theme was RPG that awakens the soul. Motoi Sakuraba was the sole composer for the game, and Mutsumi Inomata was back for the character design. The game has a day-night cycle where stronger enemies and certain elements can only be found at certain times of day. Tales of the Tempest uses a 3-on-3 linear motion battle system in which players set up a formation in advance and can then switch between characters at will in battle. The game let players select 3 planes of movement instead of the 2 used in other 2D titles, allowing players to evade or surround enemies. The game had a multiplayer mode that unlocked after a certain point and let players go to a special multiplayer dungeon in which they had to cooperate to reach a treasure. The game had only sold 205,541 units after Bandai Namco had prepared 301,000 copies for sale, and the game reviewed less favorably than other games in the series in Japan. This probably contributes to why a Western localization never came to be, and the game also never got a remade version either. But Western Tales fans and even Japanese fans wanted to see a Tales of Tempest R. Tales of Tempest has been back and forth with Bandai Namco on whether it's a mainline flagship title or a spin-off, but it seems to ultimately be a spin-off title. Its poor sales probably made it unworthy of being considered a flagship game to them. The good news is that there is a completed fan translation of Tales of the Tempest floating around if emulation doesn't offend you. In December 2007, another Japan-exclusive Tales game, Tales of Innocence, was released on the DS. This game was developed by Alpha System with music composed by Kazuhiro Nakamura. Its genre-characteristic theme is Connecting Thoughts RPG. This game let players complete side quests through guilds to level up the guilds, which would also provide players with more items and materials. The Nintendo DS wireless function also let guilds communicate with other players. This game also allowed multiplayer in battles. Like other games in the series, skits were available, but in this game, some of the interactions had dialogue choices offering opportunities to create bonds which would confer bonuses in battle. Tales of Innocence uses the Dimension Stride linear motion battle system. This system offered players a full range of movement, and enemies could be knocked into the air to continue aerial combos. Characters could be switched between instantly in battles, stringing long combos and defending well would power up a tension gauge. At a full gauge, the character would be awakened and deal more damage and would stay in this state as long as they continued to not take hits from enemies. In this awakened state, characters could combo with other characters to unleash powerful arts. Mystic arts were also in the game. The PlayStation Vita version of the game, called Tales of Innocence R, released in 2012, adds a significant amount of new features, including an extra dungeon, a rave gauge to chain arts on an enemy, an arena, additional mystic arts for all the characters, and a 4th character slot. Tales of Innocence sold about 246,000 copies in Japan, and Tales of Innocence R sold around 74,718 copies on the Vita in Japan. An adventure voice DVD was created featuring characters from other Tales games to promote Tales of Innocence's release. 3 guidebooks, a 2-part novel adaptation, and a 3-part weekly series of instruction guidebooks were released. Tales of Innocence was also adapted into a 2-part audio drama. An app was released after the release of Tales of Innocence R that let players play selected songs from the game and view concept art and character profiles. A rhythm game was included with the music. Tales of Innocence R was adapted for manga as well. While the game doesn't have an official English translation, Tales of Innocence does have a completed fan translation available, and Tales of Innocence R has a 99% complete patch still being worked on if you have the patience to wait for it. Of course, you'd have to be willing to emulate too, as long as that doesn't offend you. Tales of Symphonia did so well that Bandai Namco decided to make a sequel called Tales of Symphonia: Dawn of the New World on the Wii, developed by Namco Tales Studio. This game's genre characteristic theme was to believe in the resonating hearts of RPG. This game used the Flex Range Element enhanced linear motion battle system. An elemental grid was the key battle feature. Every enemy, skill, and battle location had an element. If 3 skills of the same element were used, it could change the battlefield's element, which would change the effectiveness of attacks and allow certain characters to participate in unison attacks. Over 200 monsters could be captured, evolved, and leveled up to fight with the protagonist. Monsters were captured by getting 4 of the same elements in the elemental grid matching with the monster's element and then defeating them. And this is the other Tales game I would never recommend to anybody. In fact, it's probably one of the worst action RPGs I've ever played. The funny thing is, I don't even remember too well why I disliked this game so much, since it was so long ago that I borrowed and played through my friend's copy of the game. I liked Legendia more, but in a similar vein, I felt like Symphonia 2 was a step back for the series, especially compared to how great the original Tales of Symphonia was. I do know I'm not the only one who disliked this game, and I'm sure there's somebody on YouTube who has torn this game to shreds better than I could or ever would want to. My purpose is more to talk about the game itself than to review it though, so if it looks good and sounds interesting, then by all means go play it. I won't judge you. Anyways, I don't know what happened during the development of this game, but Bandai Namco definitely didn't expect this game to be successful either, as, like with Tales of Legendia, they really didn't do any of the usual promotion of animes, manga, and drama CDs they usually do. There was a 4 CD soundtrack and a pre-order bonus DVD involving Symphonia's cast for Japanese pre-orders of the game. A PlayStation 3 remastered version of the game was released in 2013 and 2014, along with a remastered version of Tales of Symphonia. Of course, right after the worst Tales game I ever played came my favorite one, Tales of Vesperia, which released first on the Xbox 360 of all consoles in 2008 and 2009. Kosuke Fujishima was back on character design after previous work on Tales of Phantasia, Symphonia, and Abyss. Motoi Sakuraba was joined by Hibiki Aoyama, which was the new name for Shinji Tamura, this time for the soundtrack. The genre characteristic theme of this game was RPG of enforcing justice. I remember wanting to play this game so bad, but I couldn't justify buying an Xbox just to play the game. And my best friend, Chad that he is, actually let me borrow his Xbox 360 just so I could play his copy of the game after he had beaten it. And there was just so much about this game that I loved. It was the first Tales game to actually include Bonnie Pink's vocal track Ring a Bell on the opening of the game instead of a generically composed BGM to avoid copyright. And it's probably my second favorite OP to a Tales game next to the one for Tales of Xillia 2. Yuri Lowell was such an awesome protagonist compared to all the do-gooder shonen Tales protagonists up to that point. Just enough edge to be relatable, but not so much as to blatantly shock or come off as an edgelord for the sake of being different. Even the main villain in the game was just cool. Maybe not Sephiroth cool, but by far one of the best Tales villains ever created. Although Tales of Abyss had a better story in my opinion, the story to this game was interesting enough to keep me hooked. And I really liked the skill system, which had characters learning skills by equipping different things and fighting with them equipped. If Tales of Symphonia was the best JRPG on the GameCube, Tales of Vesperia was easily the best Xbox 360 JRPG, beating even the noble attempts Mistwalker made at JRPGs on Microsoft's platforms. So the battle system for this game was called the Evolved Flex Range Linear Motion Battle System. Up to 4-player multiplayer was supported for battles. Enemy icons in the world map could be encountered, and close by enemies could be drawn into the fight. Titles affect various aspects of characters, and skills could actually be learned during battles. Players could chain attacks together and eventually trigger fatal strikes that instantly kill enemies or severely damage bosses. An overlimit gauge would fill with skilled play, and triggering it allowed players to perform continuous attacks or cast arts without casting times. Secret missions could be triggered during battles, and if accomplished, additional grade or items could be acquired. The flashy mystic arts were in the game too, of course. The game sold like gangbusters, but not right away. The Xbox version of the game sold about 614,000 units total, which was very respectable for a JRPG on that platform at the time. But a year later, the PS3 got an improved version of the game featuring a new character that was released only in Japan. Together with that version and the amazing definitive edition released in 2019, the game realized total sales of 1,580,000 units. Western players wouldn't be able to play the improved version of the game with the new character until the definitive edition's worldwide release in 2019 on Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Windows. I've personally played it on Steam, and the game is still as awesome as I remember it, even if it is a bit dated with its constant menuing to change equipment and dated UI features. The new character adds a fun lottery element to combat that I enjoyed toying around with. Tales of Vesperia had an anime released in Japanese cinemas before the game's release, which has been fan-translated and is actually pretty decent for being so short. There were also 5 manga adaptations, 3 novel adaptations, editions, and multiple CD dramas. In December 2008, Japan got Tales of Hearts on the Nintendo DS. Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura were back for the soundtrack. The battle system in Tales of Hearts plays out on a 2D field when players contact enemy symbols on the field. Tales of Hearts' genre characteristic theme was a meeting between Hearts RPG. The combination aerial linear motion battle system in Tales of Hearts adds a feature where a combination bar fills up and a player can use a full bar to form a combination attack with a character that isn't in the active party. There were also 3 characters total in the party at once in this game. An emotion gauge fills when the character blocks and depletes when the character takes action. A lower emotion gauge also means lower defense. Special actions called combination blasters can be used, and the mystic arts are in the game too. Defeated enemies drop items and materials that can be used to level up character abilities and yield certain abilities and skills. Characters' weapons can level up in a choice of 3 upgrade trees after they have accumulated enough skills. The PlayStation Vita version, called Tales of Hearts R, developed by 7th Chord, released in 2013 and 2014, let a 4th party member join the battle in 3D environments. The updated aerial chase linear motion battle system added a mechanic that let characters chase an enemy they launch into the air to continue a combo attack. Players can select an ally at the right moment to perform a chase cross attack, and if players hold down the button, it activates a finishing move. Soma build points are used to level up characters. This version of the game added more mystic arts, union arts specific to unique character pairings, and a special combo command accessory that grants the character access to all their arts for a limited time. There were also 2 new playable characters added to the game. The Nintendo DS version sold a little lower than Bandai Namco's 400,000 unit expectations at 260,000 units in 2009. The PlayStation Vita version doesn't have total worldwide sales numbers, but the Vita version of the game at least released in the West, so people could play it in English. I actually played the DS version of this game while I was living in Japan, and the Vita version when it was later released in the West. My opinion for this title is heavily biased, as part of the entertainment for me of playing the DS version was that I was actually playing it in Japanese and had to heavily use my kanji and sometimes grammar dictionaries to understand the game. Also, I tend to favor dual-screen JRPG gaming, so take that for what it's worth. The DS version of the game also had the UI segregated to the bottom screen, which was just nice to have it separate from where the action was taking place on top. But the Vita version was fun too, and it did have better graphics. It almost felt like a completely different game, to be honest, with all the changes in the faster battle system. While the DS version hasn't received an official localization, a fan translation is available if emulation doesn't offend you. The DS version of Tales of Hearts received several pre-order bonuses in Japan to promote the game. A linked edition of Tales of Hearts R released in Japan with a Vita and themed accessories. First print versions of Hearts R came with a downloadable game called Tales of Hearts R Infinite Evolve, which was a separate game with an exponentially increasing difficulty level. Several sets of DLC outfits were released with themes and outfits for characters from past Tales games. Tales of Hearts R was also ported to iOS in 2013 in Japan. Tales of Hearts R received a manga adaptation. The game also got an official strategy guide. After the release of the soundtrack, the game also got 5 audio dramas based on its story. Tales of Graces was Namco Tales Studios' next 3D Tales game, released first on the Wii exclusively in Japan in 2009, and then eventually with some upgrades as Tales of Graces F on the PS3 in 2010, and finally North America and Europe in 2012. Tales of Graces' genre theme was RPG to know the strength to protect. Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura composed the game's soundtrack, while Mutsumi Inomata did the character designs. This game uses the style shift linear motion battle system and features a 4-character party in battle. Characters can use skills according to chain capacity that recharges over time. An Elif gauge for allies and enemies fills and can be used to grant unlimited CC and resistance to stunning. Each character has 2 skill systems: assault arts that are predetermined combos and burst arts which can be mapped to specific inputs. Skill and attribute development depend on equipped titles and their levels. Each title has 5 levels advanced by completing battles. Bandai Namco promoted Tales of Graces with a minigame buyers could play on the Nintendo DSi called Kamenin Merchant, or Turtle Merchant. Bandai Namco also collaborated on a themed Mabo curry to play along with the same food item that could be cooked in the Tales games. A whole load of silly costumes were also released for characters in the game as DLC, and challenge battles were also available for download. Tales of Graces had 4 manga adaptations, a novel spin-off series was created detailing the game's plot and fictional world, and there were also 6 strategy guides created for the game, half for the Wii version and half for the PlayStation 3 version. Tales of Graces also got an astounding 10 drama CDs and an original soundtrack by Avex Group. The original Tales of Graces sold 216,000 copies within its first year. Its PlayStation 3 version reached over 300,000 sales a year after its release. Tales of Graces, like Tales of Vesperia, kept the Japanese title song for the English version that was released on the PS3. Speaking personally, I had a lot of fun with Tales of Graces, and it felt like a fitting game to play after Tales of Vesperia, even if it went back to the more traditional shonen protagonist. The game has one of my favorite combat systems in the series, which makes it a series favorite for me, and I do like the characters too. Tales of Graces F Remastered is actually going to be released on January January 17, 2025, and if I hadn't already played the original game, I'd definitely buy it. But I do recommend it for Tales fans that either missed out on the game or anybody looking to get into the Tales series. It's a pretty solid entry that represents the series well in my opinion, even if it isn't my favorite game in the series. Tales of Xillia was released on the PlayStation 3 in Japan in 2011, and the rest of the world in 2013. The game's main theme was RPG of unwavering convictions. Characters were designed by Mutsumi Inomata and Kosuke Fujishima. This Tales game was unique for having two protagonists, Milia Maxwell and Jude Mathis. Milia Maxwell is also the Tales series' first female protagonist. The battle system in this game was called the Dual Raid Linear Motion Battle System. 4 characters could participate in a battle. The game's action counter, called Assault Counter, or AC, defined how many actions a player could take before needing to recharge them. TP would be used when players use special skills or arts. Party members could link with each other to perform linked arts with their partner. A linked arts gauge would fill up with successful attacks, and the gauge could be expended to enter over limit, making them immune to stagger, giving them unlimited AC, and allowing the use of linked arts in succession. Tales of Xillia was the most pre-ordered game in the series in Japan, and sold 500,000 copies in a week. It achieved 1 million sales worldwide by the end of the year in 2013. There was the usual push for custom DLC released with the game. Tales of Xillia received 4 manga adaptations, 3 strategy guides, a novel series adaptation, a play diary, an art book by the character designers that delves into the characters' backstories, and a book that expands on the world's lore. 5 drama CDs were produced, with the last one featuring main characters from the sequel Tales of Xillia 2. A soundtrack was also released by Avex Group. Out of the 3D Tales games I enjoy, this one is on the lower side of my interest spectrum, but it's still a fun game. I love the battle system and most of the characters, but I wasn't too crazy about this game's story. The game was still good enough for me to be excited for Tales of Xillia 2 when that game was announced. Not my favorite Tales game, but not a bad Tales game by any means, especially compared to Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World and Tales of Legendia. Tales of Xillia's title song, Progress, by Ayumi Hamasaki is really nice too. She was actually one of my favorite Japanese singers many years ago, so it was cool seeing her do an OP for the Tales series. There are actually 2 different, but still very similar anime movies that play for the game's opening depending on who you choose as the protagonist, which I think is a neat touch. Tales of Xillia 2 was developed by Bandai Namco Studio, the renamed Namco Tales Studio after finally being fully absorbed into the company. The game released in Japan on the PlayStation 3 in 2012 and in the West in 2014. Motoi Sakuraba was the sole composer for this game. In addition to Inomata Mutsumi and Kosuke Fujishima, Daigo Okumura also contributed character designs for the game. The characters from Tales of Xillia return for this game, including Jude and Milia. The game's central theme is an RPG where your choices spin the future. Tales of Xillia 2's cross-dual raid linear motion battle system is actually extremely similar to Tales of Xillia's already really fun battle system. But Ludger Will Kresnik, the game's protagonist, is a monster on the battlefield, easily the most overpowered Tales protagonist after you understand the mechanics. I actually felt sorry for all the enemies I was destroying on the hardest difficulty in this game. Tales of Xillia 2 sold 500,000 copies in Japan, and there's no sales data for the West, but it didn't meet Bandai Namco's sales expectations. Despite the game's disappointing sales performance relative to Bandai Namco's high expectations, Tales of Xillia 2 sometimes replaces Tales of Vesperia for me as the best Tales game of all time on some days depending on my mood. The main character is awesome, and he's not a whiny teenager, more like a broke college graduate saddled with overwhelming debt, which contributed greatly to me being able to relate to him. Ludger is also a lot of fun to use in combat thanks to his fighting styles and unique combat gimmick, which I won't talk about because I don't want to spoil things more than the video I'm playing while I talk about this game. He's at least tied with Yuri Lowell from Tales of Vesperia as my favorite Tales protagonist. This game is also one of the few JRPGs that told a story that has actually gotten an emotional reaction out of me while playing it. Only Xenogears, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3, Octopath Traveler 2, and Live Alive have managed to do that. The emotion really comes through during a few of the decision points that lead to different endings in the game. On top of all that, this game has an awesome OP, Song for You by Ayumi Hamasaki, that actually outdid her OP for the first Tales of Xillia in my opinion. Tales of Xillia 2 also has some seriously sick action cinematics that still look great to this day, and the game's opening movie does a great job of showing this off too. Tales of Xillia definitely isn't the first Tales game I'd normally recommend to anybody who has never played a Tales game, but I would recommend that game simply for the fact that you can enjoy Tales of Xillia 2 afterwards. Anyways, the usual flood of character and cosmetic DLC was released with Tales of Xillia. There were 4 manga adaptations, 3 strategy guides, a drama CD, and a soundtrack. The gaps between Tales releases was noticeably widening at this point, reflecting the increasing costs and time required to make quality games on new hardware. In 2015, Tales of Zestiria was released on the PS3, PS4, and only in the West on Windows. Go Shina added some much-needed variety to Motoi Sakuraba's compositions for this game. Minoru Iwamoto joined Kosuke Fujishima, Mutsumi Inomata, and Daigo Okamura for the art. Tales of Zestiria's characteristic genre theme is RPG of passion lighting the world. The game was meant to return to Tales of Phantasia's thematic roots as an anniversary title for the Tales series. Tales of Zestiria had a more open-world layout. The player could partner with a seraph to perform actions that open up areas for more exploration on the map, and characters also had support talents that could be leveled up. Tales of Zestiria's fusionic chain linear motion battle system uses real map battles instead of transitions to a separate battle screen. Human characters specialize in close-range melee arts, while seraphs use magical arts. A rock-paper-scissors system governed art effectiveness in battle. All characters also had a mystic art. A blast gauge was linked to special abilities, allowing players to blast away enemies and recover. A spirit chain gauge fueled the ability to link characters and perform special attacks. High spirit chain, or SC, grants conditional bonuses to characters like faster SC recovery or higher damage. A special armatization feature let characters fuse with seraphs into a powerful hybrid form that could perform magical attacks according to the seraph's element. Tales of Zestiria ended up selling over 1 million copies worldwide, making it the 4th best-selling Tales game. The usual costume DLC was released, as well as 4 new mystic arts for some of the characters, skit DLC, and even some extra scenario DLC. There were also some carryover bonuses for Japanese players who had Tales of Xillia, Vesperia, or Grace's save data on their PlayStation 3 versions of the games. Japanese anime studio Ufotable animated a film for the game that was broadcast and available in Japan. This film was included in Western collector's editions of the game. The game also got an animated TV series that ties in with the next Tales game, Tales of Berseria, as a promotion. Tales of Zestiria also got a manga adaptation and an official novelization of the beginning of the game. There were a few things in this game that really annoyed me personally. The first, and by far the most annoying for me, was the exorbitantly expensive fast travel system in the game, which did a lot to destroy my enjoyment. And the second was the battle system, which is awesome and fun until enemies hit hard enough to destroy your party's high health in their armatized forms, effectively knocking out 2 units with 1 strong attack. I still had fun with the game, but not even as much fun as I had with the original Tales of Xillia. Still, the game sold really well and a lot of people really liked it, so you might too. Just 1 year later in 2016 and 2017, Bandai Namco Studios developed and released Tales of Berseria for the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and worldwide on Windows. The game's world is shared with Tales of Zestiria, with Berseria taking place 1,000 years before the events in Zestiria. Its characteristic genre theme is RPG of discovering your own reason to live. Motoi Sakuraba was the sole composer for the game. Mutsumi Inomata, Kosuke Fujishima, Minoru Iwamoto, and Daigo Okamura returned for the art and character design. Tales of Berseria uses the Liberation linear motion battle system. The soul gauge replaces the stamina and action management gauges of past Tales games. Characters can still attack with a depleted soul gauge, but the attacks are more easily deflected. Enemies can drop souls in battle that can be stolen to refill the gauge, and it also restores with time. Enemies can also steal souls in this manner from player characters. At high soul gauge thresholds, characters can enter a break soul state where combo limits can be exceeded and unique effects are brought into battle. Local multiplayer is also supported during battles, and a switch blast can be used by players by switching with reserve characters for free attack and consuming a portion of blast gauge. Performing mystic arts also depletes the blast gauge. Tales of Berseria reviewed quite well and sold over 2.5 million units worldwide as of 2024, with over half of those sales coming from the West. These numbers were proving that the Tales games were now at least as popular in the West as they were in Japan. It released with the standard suite of DLC costumes and perks most modern Tales games have. In Japan, it also received a 3-volume manga and a novel told from the character Laphicet's perspective. Tales of Berseria is definitely one of my favorite games in the series. The combat system is fun, and I like the game's darker vibe overall. While I actually don't remember most of the story, I do remember being shocked at how dark and violent the beginning of the game was compared to what I was used to in a Tales game. This was apparently the toned down version too, according to developer notes, since they wanted to keep a teen rating. But it pulls off exactly what it needs to in order to shape the personality of the main character, Velvet Crow. And speaking of Velvet, I love her design. Personality-wise, she's like an edgier, darker Yuri Lowell. There's even some cool fan art of her wearing Yuri's costume floating around. It almost feels like Velvet could have been a villain in any other Tales game, and it was interesting seeing her skits and interactions with the very different Laphicet throughout the story. In fact, the antagonist of this game looks more like the hero of any other Tales game, which gave the overall atmosphere of Berseria's story a different touch I could appreciate. At the very least, the game was a stark contrast to its related game, Tales of Zestiria. The tie-in with Zestiria is also a nice touch, but to be honest, this isn't a game you need to play Zestiria first to enjoy, and honestly, I wouldn't recommend Zestiria over this game unless playing the anti-hero offends you. With costs and production times for game development exponentially exponentially increasing, it wasn't until 2021 that Bandai Namco Studios would release their next Tales game, Tales of Arise. Minoru Iwamoto was the artist for the game, and Motoi Sakuraba the composer. The characteristic genre theme for Tales of Arise is a focus on the struggle against oppression and the fight for equality. The trademark linear motion battle system in this game doesn't have a special name like in all the other Tales games. The new battle system took inspiration from Tales of Grace's evasion and countering mechanics, which instantly got me interested. This is one of the few Tales games that doesn't have multiplayer mechanics, but it does add a boost strike feature to allow multiple party members to perform destructive attacks under certain conditions. The game has the typical Tales costume and bonus item DLC content. A DLC expansion to the story called Beyond the Dawn was released in 2023. A manga anthology for the game was also released in Japan, but there really wasn't as huge a media push for this game on the merchandise side in Japan as there usually was for a Tales game. Bandai Namco did pay Lindsey Sterling to deliver a pretty cool violin performance of one of the game's songs during the Game Awards in 2021 though. Although Tales of Arise's plot progression felt very mechanical to me, just going from one run-in lord to the next for most of the game, I still really liked the storytelling in this game, and I think the game made excellent use of the graphical power available to them in 2021. The battle system is great fun, like it is in most Tales games. Some of the run-in nobles genuinely gave me chills when encountering them in the story. As human as the villains were, they almost felt like ferocious divine entities when fighting them in combat. The second run-in lord is a perfect example of this. As a fan of the Tales series, I had manly tears of fear and horrid anticipation, as I nearly stained my pants trying to prevent the mystic art I knew was coming based solely on what he was chanting and how it matched the spell's chant from other Tales games. I just paused in absolute open-mouthed shock as my party met its imminent end, with its hit points melting to nothing like Daos in Tales of Fantasia. The entire setup of the mystic art, as it would warp the environment further into the chant, and experiencing it at the end will probably be one of my most memorable Tales moments for years to come. It really made me realize that yes, I was definitely playing a Tales game. The one thing that really ruined Tales of Arise for me as a whole compared to all my favorite Tales games was the ridiculous cost to recover health and MP, which is ironic because I would have thought the developers would have learned their lesson from making fast travel stupidly expensive in Zestiria. My biggest regret was playing the game on its hard difficulty because my party got beat up so hard I could barely afford to upgrade my equipment thanks to all the damage my party would take from enemies that needed to be paid for. And because my party was taking the damage, it's not something I could mitigate with skilled play since it was the AI controlling my party, not me. It's probably a better idea to just play the game on normal. I also haven't played the DLC expansion to this game, so I can't really say anything more than I already have about it. In any case, it's still a great Tales game and it sold like gangbusters, shipping over 1 million units in its first week of sales. Of course, the pandemic inflated the numbers like it did for most great games selling in this time period. The game's sales were further boosted when it won the RPG of the Year award at the West's The Game Awards in 2021, giving it a lot of mainstream attention, even if I think Shin Megami Tensei 5 should have won that award instead. As of February 2024, the game sold over 3 million units, and I'd say it deserves those sales. People criticized Berseria for looking like an old game, so Bandai Namco obviously worked hard to give Arise great graphics, and Western gamers love great graphics, so these sales numbers didn't surprise me in the least. I have no doubts that Bandai Namco Studios' next new flagship Tales game, which will probably release in 2027 or 2028 thanks to ballooning quadruple A games development cycles, will also deliver a thrilling experience to the next generation. It may shock you to know I didn't talk about a lot of other spin-off games in the Tales series that were released on mobile or don't really fit the flagship title's action RPG mold. Technically, Tales of Symphonia, Dawn of the New World, and Tales of the Tempest are in this category, but since they shared the similar battle systems of the flagship games and released on consoles, I decided to talk about them. Tales of Link, Tales of Card Evolved, Tales of Kizna, and Tales of Asteria were mobile Tales games. The PSP also got Tales of Versus and Tales of the Heroes, Twin Brave. The Tales of the World subseries begins with Tales of Fantasia, Narikiri Dungeon, which I briefly touched on. Tales of the World, Radiant Mythology, actually did release in the West. The Tales of Fandom subseries includes 2 puzzle adventure games released on the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. Mobile game Tales of the Rays released in Japan and worldwide. In 2020, mobile game Tales of Crestoria was released. The latest spin-off game, Tales of Luminaria, released late in 2021, featured 21 characters playable together or independently, and included a multiplayer mode. I think most of these service games have been discontinued. In addition to the games and all the merchandise that came with them, Bandai Namco began holding yearly Tales of festivals in Japan since 2008 with live events celebrating the Tales series. These events usually accompany a poll of favorite Tales characters, the appearance of prominent voice actors in the series performing in live skits in the style of Tales games, and sometimes announcements of new Tales games. These yearly festivals have definitely helped propel Tales as more of a household name in the JRPG community in Japan than the more niche JRPG series it had been for many years in the West. While I've been with the Tales series since Tales of Destiny and was able to enjoy Tales of Fantasia through fan translations and the official Western release years later. It wasn't until Tales of Symphonia that I started taking the Tales series seriously as a JRPG heavyweight that could compete with the likes of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. The series as a whole is very consistent in its quality, with usually better than average storytelling, well-developed, richly voiced characters, and a heavily RPG-tinted action-flavored battle system, with its evolved forms of its trademark linear motion battle system. The quality is so consistent, it's difficult for me to even recommend individual games in the series to people or even put them on a tier list. I spent most of my time playing these games as the main character, but many games, particularly later in the series' history, actually changed around gameplay mechanics quite a bit if you controlled different characters. Magic users almost always played dramatically differently from melee characters, for example. And even among melee weapon users, weapons and arts had their own attack speeds and elements, so each character had their own kits of tricks to use in battle. And in overdrive or powered up states, it was common for melee characters to get unique bonuses according to who you were controlling. Talking about the Tales games within the context of the entire series is like talking with an anime fan about your favorite anime. There will always be disagreements and hot takes, but at the end of the day, a Tales game is a Tales game. Everybody has different tastes, and the fact that so many people have different opinions on their favorite Tales games is just a testament to their consistent quality. Most of them are pretty good, and there are a few I just like a little more than the others. I will say though, that if you're new to the Tales series, my only recommendation is that you do not play Tales of Symphonia, Dawn of the New World, or Tales of Legendia first. You'll probably never want to play another Tales game ever again if those are your first. Though, I'm sure someone watching this video is going to argue in the comments that Tales of Legendia or Tales of Symphonia, Dawn of the New World is the best Tales game ever made, and I'll laugh when I see it. You shouldn't even really trust sales numbers when choosing which game to play either. In fact, Tales of Grace's F Remastered would be an excellent starting point for this series, as the most recent Tales release to this video, and it might even be out by now if this video drops after January 17, 2025. Sure, Motoi Sakuraba's music can get a little stale, and I'd love to see composers like Go Shina, or anybody else really, get a bigger role in the soundtrack of these games. And yeah, the Tales series was definitely behind the most comparable JRPG series to it, Star Ocean, in the late 90s, with that game's 3D battle system and unique interstellar settings. Yoshiharu Gotanda, the young prodigy programmer at Wolf Team who created Tales of Fantasia, wouldn't have literally left the team after creating that game to lead Tri-Ace and make Star Ocean if he didn't think he could do it better. Also, the fact that you can just doll your protagonists up in loads of flashy costumes and accessories to hilariously take away a lot of the heaviness of Tales stories can work against the game trying to tell a good story sometimes. However, Tales' emphasis on bringing its characters to life with full voice tracks, skits, battle dialogue, and silly performances after winning fights really endeared it to fans and gave the game something special no other JRPG series had. Bandai Namco also threw a huge budget behind these games, determined to turn them into their flagship action JRPGs. As a result, the games just continued to improve in quality over time. The combat systems in Tales have also evolved favorably.
I stand in the full light of the heavens, command thee, who opens the gates of hell. Come forth, divine lightning. This ends now. Indignation!
The Tales series has also developed its own Tales quirks you can expect to see in different games in the series, like the Turtles race, spelled with a Z, that started showing up in all the later games, and the classic Indignation spell I opened up this video with has also made numerous appearances in different forms throughout the Tales series. Voiced skits between characters, cooking mechanics, arenas, and similar fighting styles that usually appear in multiple games too, used by different characters. The Mystic Arts, or Hisatsuwaza as I like to call them, are great fun to look at, and I'd encourage anybody who loves flashy anime action to search through the Mystic Art compilation videos for Tales games on YouTube for some eye candy, even if you aren't interested in playing the games. Sadly, Mutsumi Inomata did pass away on March 10, 2024, so the Tales series won't be able to go back to some of its earlier charming character designs in her style for newer games. But I do have faith that the series will continue to be a strong force when it comes to action JRPGs. My next Tales game is going to be the very recently fan-translated version of Tales of Rebirth, because I have never played that game before. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.